In Part 2, Nintendo snatched the game industry from the jaws of obscurity and officially transcended gaming from a forgettable fad to official phenomenon. On the way, Sega tried their hand at competition and did a stand-up job at it, while other non-game related companies saw all the money being made and decided to try and get in on it while the getting was good, resulting in many bad games. Another funny thing happened on the way to the bank for gaming, though. They took a shot from culture straight to the arm. Not to imply that they were injected with culture, that would come later. This is more of the bang-bang shoot-you drive-by kind of culture shot. In the attempt to grab the more mature gamers in the 12 to 16 range, a lot of games like the just previously mentioned Splatterhouse turned on the red stuff because nothing says we're mature like ultra-violent power fantasies. Games like Mortal Kombat, Doom, and hilariously Night Trap began to worry parents of young children who thought they were just buying them another harmless Mario game. Interestingly, attempting to keep their name as family-friendly as possible, Nintendo insisted that the blood in Mortal Kombat be recolored to look like sweat, like everyone had just run a mile in a sauna, and removing several of the more violent fatalities. The Sega version could be uncensored by entering the G-code ABABCABB. I'll let you, the viewer, decide which version probably sold more. Famously, Senator Jill Lieberman took advantage of this moral outrage by telling the game industry to get its shit together or hand it to them in a box to save them trouble of packing it up themselves. Sega was the first to respond with its video game rating console, followed closely by the 3DO rating system and a few others, but the one that stuck was the one we all know today, the Entertainment Software Ratings. All of these proceedings and their subsequent results created the first real tangible debate the games ever caused, and it's one that still rages on to this day with no clear answer. Meanwhile, while the realm of the PC was not able to escape, and in fact was largely culpable for the violence controversy, it was largely aloof to the console wars. While it did have its own sort of fanboy war going on between itself and Apple, as it does to this day, as we all know, Macs got no game. So the PC market was mostly held by the PC. With the introduction of the mouse, admittedly pioneered by Apple, and by pioneered I mean stolen, and then subsequently stolen again by Microsoft, and more advanced 3D graphics than the consoles could muster. PC gaming did kind of have its own renaissance in the 90s, allowing for games like Alone in the Dark to help create the survival horror genre, Doom and Wolfenstein to make first-person shooters a thing, and Myst to bring adventure games into a whole new cerebral realm. PC gaming was now, and had been for a while, a more consolidated, clearly defined business instead of a handful of small companies and hobbyist sharebread groups. Additionally, 1990 was the year LucasArts jumped from pretty good company that's associated with Star Wars to amazing artists who make hilarious adventure games with The Secret of Monkey Island. Over the next decade, they released a series of highly lauded adventure games that are cherished all the way to the present day, including but not limited to another Monkey Island game, an Indiana Jones game, because this is LucasArts after all, Day of the Tentacle, and the Sam & Max series. In 1995, 4 years after the SNES was released in North America, Sony decided it wanted in on this game and released the PlayStation, contemporarily referred to as the PS1. Originally, the PS1 was a joint Sony-Nintendo venture, the system being designed to support both the Super Nintendo cartridges and the proprietary Sony discs. But some shady wording in the contract caused Nintendo to pull out like someone's girlfriend just announced she forgot her birth control, and Sony decided to just release the console anyway, minus the Nintendo support. The PS1 did fantastically well due to its 3D capabilities, eventual pioneering of the dual analog controls, and as of yet unheard of ability to market games both for young children and teenagers. Over its lifetime, the PS1 sold enough to give the Game Boy a run for its money, not to imply that the Game Boy wasn't still making gobs of money hand over fist. Just a year after that, Nintendo, feeling too big to fail, released what is probably one of their biggest commercial failures to date, the Virtual Boy. Designed by Gunpei Yokoi, it was a red and black monstrosity that gave people headaches and, if you tried really hard to focus or long enough, might show you a bit of the game they were losing at. Unfortunately, Yokoi had no intention of releasing the Virtual Boy in its current form because, I mean, come on, the man's not an idiot. Nintendo, however, rushed out to free up resources for the development of their upcoming Nintendo 64. The resulting catastrophic failure served only to put Nintendo even further behind Sony. Yokoi retired the next year after producing his one last creation, the Game Boy Pocket, though reportedly not because of his Virtual Boy failure, simply because, hey, he's really old now and wants to go take a break. Yokoi was hit by a car in 1977 and pronounced dead 2 hours later. Sad story. You should look it up. 1995 is also notable for the release of the Sega Saturn for a few mostly hilarious reasons. Sega originally announced that the Saturn would be releasing on Saturn Day, September 2nd, 1995. It made it all the way to May 11th before it told everyone that they were kidding and releasing the console that very day. While this seemed like a perfectly designed surprise attack on Nintendo, it horribly backfired because, well, everyone thought they had like 5 months before they had to finish designing any software for this thing, meaning the system only released with 6 games. On top of that, in order to get the systems on store shelves secretly, Sega made very quiet deals with 4 major retailers in the US, and anyone who hadn't gotten that deal took their betrayed feelings straight to the bank with Sony Nintendo and friends. By the time the PS1 came out about 6 months later, Saturn had sold about 80,000 units. Sony crushed that by selling 100,000 units in the first weekend. On the bright side, Sega Saturn did come out with some hilarious attack ads, including one where they launched and shot at Nintendo 64 consoles, clay pigeon style, and referred to them as Pretendo. In 1996, gaming received its first real sex icon, followed quickly by its first real sex scandal. Tomb Raider was released on 5 different platforms, including Mac and PC, and shook things up quite a bit if you, get my meaning. Lara Croft, protagonist, was unusual at the time simply by virtue of having breasts. At the time and to this day, the character is held up both as a major step in gaming and a perfect example of over-sexualization of women in games. Gamer culture latched onto her like a fanboy on a very uncomfortable booth babe, and it was unsurprisingly a short amount of time before rumors of a nude raider code began circulating. In truth, it was part fan mod, part urban myth, resulting in developer IDOS sending around a series of cease and desist letters to various places with names similar to nuderaider.com. This wasn't the first attempt at porn in games. Custer's Revenge, released way back in '82 for the Atari 2600, centered around traversing a field of arrow volleys to get some sweet Native American poontang. But this was a relatively niche game, as were others like it. It's not that these games didn't get lots of publicity. Sex and violence always does. Custer's Revenge itself sold more than 800,000 copies, but it came out at a time when games were just largely niche altogether. Plus, I mean, look at that. I don't even feel the need to censor it, it's so vague. For all I know, it could just be some curiously colored cacti. Inside the game manual it says, if the kids catch you and ask, tell them the Custer and the maiden are dancing. Dancing. That's all I have for this week, but be sure to come back next time for the release of the Nintendo 64, the world domination attempt at Pokemon, and just generally stuff getting crazy. It might seem, in this and upcoming episodes, like I'm getting into more discrete detail as I get closer to the present day, and that's not wholly inaccurate. In truth, it's just that way more interesting stuff happens the closer we get to the present day. Eventually, we'll just be going year by year through the major events that happen because there's a lot to cover. All of that aside, though, until next time, I'm Tom and Review, and this has been part 3 of a brief, incomplete history of video games. Thank you. Good night.